So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our second to last Forage Forum Friday for this session. I'm incredibly excited to have two gentlemen with us with Cisco Company or Cisco Seeds. The first is Jeremy Sweeten. He and his wife manage a beef and hay farm in eastern Upper Peninsula of Michigan. They have 4 kids that love farming as well. So they raise grass-fed beef and Timothy hay specifically. So Jeremy obtained his master's of science degree from Purdue in 2003 and had actually Dr. Keith Johnson as his advisor. So he works as a northern regional agronomist for Cisco Seeds. So forages, livestock, and equipment are all a part of his daily life and what he does. Our second speaker today is Dustin Johnson. He's a farmer and general forage enthusiast, as he calls himself, who lives near Kokomo, Indiana, with his wife, Abby, and their daughters, Riley and Reagan. So together they operate Johnson Hay and Grain, LLC. So their farm specializes in growing high-quality alfalfa hay as a cash crop, as well as certified organic and conventional grains. So Dustin passionately believes in soil conservation and the power of extended, diverse crop rotations to help unlock the natural productivity of farmland. In his work off farm, Dustin is a forage agronomist for the Cisco Seed Companies and also serves as an elected supervisor for the Clinton County Soil and Water Conservation District here in Indiana. So we're very excited to have both of you with us today to kind of talk about hay equipment, kind of that maintenance, just some of those things we need to watch out for before and during our hay season. So with that, I will leave it to both of you. Again, if you all have any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to leave them in the chat box, or we can unmute at the end and ask it at that point. So without further ado, I'll leave it to you, Jeremy and Dustin.
Okay, well, thank you for inviting us to do this. This is going to be kind of fun. Never thought the experience of working as a mechanic and trying to keep our own junk going would pay off for somebody else, but we're going to give it a shot. And, so part of what we're going to do is go through equipment maintenance, what to look for, some things like that. But then Dustin and I are going to talk about our different business models that we approach from opposite ends of the spectrum. So let's see if we can get my computer to cooperate here. So Dustin, can you see that since you're the only one unmuted?
Yes, yep, that looks good, Jeremy.
All right, well, here we go. So a little bit about our farm, just as some background information. We're in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan near Sault Ste. Marie. We try to cover about 800 acres of Timothy hay once a year. And then if there's a second cutting, we try to graze most of the regrowth. We have about 400 acres of pasture and 100 cow-calf pairs. So from May to September is a busy time of year, but our growing season is only about 120 days and our grazing season is about 150. So a lot has to happen. We have to have our equipment in good shape, keep it moving. And as you can see from the picture, none of it's new, but it's very reliable.
Yep, and I operate with my family a farm we call Johnson Hay and Grain, and it's our forage enterprise is part of an overall diverse farm where we've got several different enterprises going all at once. We're located in north central Indiana, and this moment in time, I've got about 130 acres of alfalfa that we're growing as a cash crop. And I think that's a little bit unique in our area too. We're not baling hay to feed it. We're actually baling hay to sell it. And that gives me a little bit of a unique perspective because looks are very important on all the hay. And the other end of the farm is about 600 acres of row crops that I operate with my dad. We've got about half of that certified organic. And so we're using our hay acres and cover crops for both weed suppression and nitrogen fixation. And the more different things we can do out there, the better. It's kind of, if you remember television commercials for some kind of an exercise program, it was muscle confusion. We're doing cultural practice confusion on the farm. Sometimes it gets mowed, sometimes it gets cultivated, sometimes it gets plowed. So it's different things, and yeah, and it seems to be working out pretty good for us.
Okay. So Dustin and I work together at Cisco Seeds. He works as a Southern agronomist, so basically covers US 24 and South in Indiana, Illinois, Ohio, and then I cover the northern part of the territory. So we get to see a lot of interesting things, whether it's cattle or hay or cover crops. So quite a broad range. And one thing I should mention, our better Timothy hay goes to Florida, and the southeast part of the U.S. is horse hay. So trying to keep quality and timely harvest is really important to us. So hence the next slide. What does a breakdown cost? First off, it's going to cost you time, whether it's getting parts, if the weather is going to close that harvest window for you. Rained on hay is never the goal for anybody, but it does happen. So a breakdown can lead to that. Reduced forage quality, usually because of the weather or not being able to get a timely harvest to begin with. Ultimately leads to a lot of frustration. You know, things are running fast and furious during hay season, and then when there's a breakdown, it's really bad. And at the end of the day, you can also end up delaying future harvest. You know, if first or second cutting gets pushed back, especially on alfalfa, that could mean there's no fourth or fifth cutting. So the goal of this presentation is to help you think a little bit about looking at your equipment more than just going, well, tires are round and it's time to go. So what is your maintenance plan? The goal is to avoid the picture on the right. So Dustin, do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, I think and the value of that breakdowns, we tend to think about the economic cost and how what toll may be taken there, but there's also a mental toll for things not going well. Your own enjoyment of the farm and what's going on goes down, and then all the people that are working for you have a bad day too.
And your wife usually gets to drive 3 hours for parts.
Yes.
So going to start off with the obvious thing with tractors. Give them, especially right now with supplies being tight on parts, not knowing when you're going to get things, high fuel cost, all this is factored in, and especially where we live, just being so far from a dealer, our goal is to keep extra parts and filters on hand to know that we have them, so if we need them. Dustin had a really good point of doing honest tire evaluation. You know, my comment earlier was just make sure the tires are round, but look for weather checking, unusual wear, and really try to keep a couple spare tires around that fit a variety of equipment, because some days trying to get a tire replaced may turn into a week or a month, depending what size it is. In past experience of working on other people's equipment and my own, cab filters often get overlooked, and air conditioning components get overlooked. Blow the condenser out, blow the evaporator out, clean the cab out, make sure the air conditioner is working, because hay baling time never happens when it's snowing. So you need that air conditioner if you're in a cab. Pretty important. And they're kind of finicky systems, so a little preventative maintenance can go a long ways on that. Worn hydraulic lines, especially ones that are hard to get to, it's worth an extra 20 minutes with a flashlight and really look over the hydraulic hoses on a tractor and make sure nothing's rubbing that could give you a potential blowout when you need it. An often point that is forgot are lights and flashers and slow moving vehicle signs. So if you have an evening where you're able to bail late and it's dark, and that is not the time to realize that you have one headlight working on the tractor and it's on the back of the machine. So spend a little extra time in the shop, go through it, make sure all the lights and the flashers are working for safety, because it seems like every year you hear about more and more vehicle farm equipment accidents. So, you know, if those lights are working, part of it is it removes some of the liability from you, and the other is it just hopefully helps you get home safely at the end of the day. Any oil leaks could be signs of a major problem, like having to split a tractor to put a CO in. So, you know, track those oil leaks down and check those out before you need the machine. And Dustin suggested that we follow the service manual recs, which that's going to give you a list of things to go through. Like, you know, all of a sudden we didn't know there was this oil filter here and that was supposed to be serviced 2,000 hours ago. The service manual will help you cover that. And like Dustin also said, keep good records. And we were even talking that the Sharpie writing the hours on the oil filter usually rubs off. And so, a good paper record of that helps. The other thing that we do is we actually use a paint marker on all of our filters because it does not rub off. So anything you'd like to add to that, Dustin?
Yes, yeah. I'd like to add that a lot of those are kind of pre-season type things that are important to remember. But there's also a lot that you can do in the mornings before heading to the field. Make sure that whoever's operating your equipment, that you expect them to be checking fluid levels. Especially my employees that help me, we instill that every time we're filling up with diesel fuel to pump is a good time to check the level of hydraulic oil and look in engine oil and make sure that the other fluids are up. For us too, a recurring problem on the Johnson farm when we're baling hay is the buildup of chaff. We end up pretty frequently on a daily or every other day type of basis needing to blow air backwards through the radiator screens and the visual inspection to make sure that those aren't becoming clogged up. It seems like a tractor can run a long time pretty dirty, and then you cross some sort of threshold and all of a sudden the engine's overheating. And it's usually when there's storm clouds on the horizon and and you've got to call somebody with a leaf blower, bring out something. It's much easier to stay ahead of that before the day begins.
So, and one thing we do, because we're not always at our home farm, is we carry a leaf blower on the big square baler with us, and we use that to blow everything off at night. Because I think if there's a hot bearing or a bearing failing, if it sits there all night with chaff on it, it's a better potential for fire. And when you shut everything off at night, you're ready to go home. So a leaf blower is good for cleaning everything off in the evening, and as well as blowing radiators out and things like that. So Keith Dr. Johnson didn't really say anything about this, but being in the seed business, this came to mind as part of your hay equipment. And we always get those panic calls in the spring of, we have this seed mix, how do we set our drill? Or what setting should it be on? Well, this is a great time of year to go ahead and pull everything in the shop, get your seed early, calibrate it before planting day. And while it's in there, and after the calibration is done, go ahead and check out all the bearings and the colders and the press wheels and make sure everything's in good shape. And one thing I've found is that the seed cups and the seed tubes like to plug up with spider webs and old seed and stuff you didn't even know was in there. So an air compressor and a blowgun is a good way to clean those out and just get everything ready to go. So when you get that nice day in April, you're ready to roll. Anything you'd like to add, Dustin?
My favorite thing to do on a drill after the basic stuff is to take it out either on a concrete area or in a field with the tarp strap holding up the press wheels, and actually see the seeds coming out in a row to know that every row is planting.
Okay. All right. So probably the most important part to get started, whether it's a pole type or self-propelled mower, is service the cutter bar and the gearboxes. And I don't care if this is a disc mower or a sickle cut mower, they all have a lot of moving parts, and that's a high stress part of the machine. Look the cutter bar, especially over for oil leaks, but pretty much everything. Check oils, change oils, look at your operator and your service manuals to see when to do that. Like conditioning rolls, put a pry bar in and pick them up and down and check the bearings on the ends, and check belts for coming apart. And back to the parts availability thing, get this stuff fixed now before you need it, because you may not be able to find it when you need it. So another good thing to look at is conditioning roll setting, and your book will tell you how to do that, because if they're improperly set, you're either going to have a lot of dry matter and quality loss, or you're going to have delayed drying. So one thing that Dustin brought up when we were building this presentation was that dealerships have really good incentive programs in the spring to do an inspection on a machine and repair it. So if you're not mechanically apt to do this, at least give it a look over and say, yes, it needs to go to the dealer, or no, that it doesn't. So go ahead, Dustin.
Yeah, and that's really good. A lot of this, especially on high-speed disc mowers and uh, smaller operators, or even somebody new in the business, these machines can be really intimidating. So a dealer inspection program is just money well spent that they may find something that you didn't. I do mine, take advantage of it probably, well, usually the year after a machine is paid off, or every 4 or 5 years, just to get somebody else's eyes on it. And if you've got, if you're like me and have a medium level of competency, and you have a friend like Jeremy that is very talented mechanically, get them out there, bribe them with lunch, pay them, get another set of eyes on the machine to help you find something before it goes wrong.
Okay, there we go. Yep, make sure we're on the right page here. On disc mowers, I put a page about or a slide about knives in here. So there's two different styles, and I don't really care what brand it is. There's a standard lift knife and a high lift knife. And on first harvest that we're getting ready for, if you're going to be in really thick crop or it lodges, if it becomes a late cutting, instead of May 10th, you're at June 10th, and the wind has knocked the whole field down. The high lift knives on the left have a merit for helping pick up some of that crop that's lodged. And so a lot of times on first cutting, we'll switch out to the high lift knives just to try to get more crop picked up off the ground and cut. The low lift, but definitely change out to the low lift knives to reduce the amount of wind coming off those turtles and the blade spinning for second cutting on. So pretty important. But Dustin and I talked a little bit that it's really easy to become complacent and look at the knives and go, that's good enough. And dull knives can really be detrimental to getting a good, clean, even cut. With the cost of fuel, dull knives require more horsepower, so you're going to burn more fuel, which is more money out of your pocket. If they're dull enough, you won't be able to operate at an optimal ground speed. So we've even had bent knives get into the actual cutter bar, the gear case. So usually you can hear that, but if you have a teenager running your equipment, listening to headphones, they may not hear that. So checking those knives out before season, then every day while you're running is very important. Go ahead, Dustin.
I agree. And one thing to emphasize here, maybe on the detriment to the plants of having a ragged cut, it's really that lets carbohydrates and water leak out of those stems when they don't get a clean cut. And so dull knives could actually hurt your yield a little bit on the next cutting. And it's very important to keep an eye on it.
So Dustin and I also had the conversation that it seems like some of the knives on a mower can last 1,000 acres and some of them last 1,000 feet. So you can see, for those of you that haven't worked on a disc mower, that these knives have a bevel on either side. So these knives are reversible. One thing to watch out for is just because you can reverse it, maybe compare it to a new knife and make sure it's not bent, because if it's bent up and you flip it upside down, all of a sudden it's bent down and dragging on the cutter bed. So something else to look at. So disc mowers are fairly solid as far as being rugged, but they still require maintenance, and there's a lot of moving parts inside. So changing the oil is one of the best things you can do. The cutter bars don't have oil filters on them, so if there's any contaminants, metal shavings, water, dirt from whatever, there's nothing to pull that out of the oil. So timely oil changes are very important. Like we talked before, check knives, replace knives. We like to start the season off with a new set and get things going right. I think you can see the cursor on the screen. Checking the bearings in each one of these turtles is important. So you can stick a pry bar under the end and see if there's any rock up and down, and that will let you know if that bearing is starting to fail. One other thing that we have found is keeping everything cleaned out from under the discs. So that means taking these 4 bolts out and pulling that disc off or the turtle off making sure there's no twine or high tensile wire or sticks or anything wrapped up in there. And it's amazing how much crud will get wound up underneath those discs. So that's a really good thing to pull apart, and also to check for oil leaks seeping up around the bearings. And finally, the thing to look at underneath are the skid shoes, because that's what the weight of the head rides on. That's making contact with your field, and that's what's going to be wearing out. So anything else, Dustin?
I'd make a plug for something I really believe in, which is carrying spare parts. And so really all of these components that can be taken out by a rock, you should have multiples of them, maybe not in the tractor cab, but at least on the shop shelf. So you can grab, and I carry an entire turtle shell top in the lifters, because it's, especially if you get something where a rock damages the head of a bolt that holds one of those components on, it's actually easier in the moment in the field to just swap the entire turtle shell rather than one of the components. And I've talked to folks that will run maybe a turtle that's got a damaged lifter on it. But if you think about it, that if there's actually material missing from that piece after you hit a rock, it's spinning high speed and it's steel, so it's heavy. And that whole thing being out of balance, I think, can accelerate wear on the bearings that are in there. So having those spare parts and changing it as soon as something's damaged is definitely a best management practice.
So for the folks that haven't been around a disc mower, these discs operate in opposite directions. So there's a left and a right direction, and the knives are also indicated that way. And if you put them on backwards, it'll look like you're driving over the hay with a roller rather than trying to cut it. But like Dustin, we keep a left and a right turtle with us that's already got the blades and everything on it, and we carry an electric impact wrench with us so we can change blades or turtles or whatever. So the main thing is don't leave the impact wrench on the cutter bar when you take off. So
that's what slip clutches are for.
Right. So a little bit about mower settings. You know, depending what crop was cut last year, if you're just strictly alfalfa and that's all you cut, then cutting height probably hasn't changed. But if you've been in sorghum, Sudan grass, and small grains and fields that have had some tillage, like a cover crop field or something like that, you're probably going to have lifted the skid shoes up to raise the header height or the cutting height. So make sure the cutter height's set for the crop that you're going into. And there again, I'm going to mention conditioning rolls, making sure that they're the right gap and the right tension and that they're in good condition. And header pitch is important, because if it's pitched too far forward, you can scalp and cut too low into the crop, especially the crowns of the alfalfa, or if it's a grass field, get into orchard grass and damage the regrowth. But if the head isn't pitched far enough forward, you're going to leave yield. So and a final thing to look at is the width of the swath shields and how your windrow is going to get laid out. So the wider the better until you're driving on it on windrow width. So anything else, Dustin?
I agree.
Not a lot to say on rakes and tethers, but it's important to, just like the cutter bar, their gearboxes don't have any oil filters on them. They're usually full of some type of gear oil. And if there's any contamination, because a lot of this equipment doesn't get put inside during the winter, either moisture can condensate in there or it can leak in somehow. It's always good to change run the tedder or the rake for 15 or 20 minutes and then change the oil in the gearboxes to get any contaminants out. We've had problems in the past with gearboxes breaking mounting bolts or coming loose. So, a good once over with a pry bar and just check to make sure everything's tight, and visual inspection. Same with universal joints and tires and wheel bearings. Just look it all over and check for that weather checking in the tires and make sure everything's ready to go. So, what else? You got anything?
I hear you say that, Jeremy, because I've also had trouble on, especially on a tedder, with fasteners coming loose that hold the tedder arms on, and so those, and after a machine is several years old, even, I'm not even sure how that happens, but but it's definitely good to check that stuff at the beginning of the season. And then also wanted to make a plug for absolutely replace a tooth when it comes off a rake or a tedder, because that's just lost yield if you don't pick up that crop. And then also keep in mind when you replace a tedder tooth that or a rake tooth, that all of the teeth around it have been wearing, and that may be the longest tooth on the machine. So we make it a pretty regular practice when we replace teeth on a rake or a tedder to take a torch and remove the very tip. Sometimes just a little bit, or sometimes a lot, depending on how aged the machine is. Basically, because you don't want one tooth to be longer than all the rest. And lots of machines tend to pick up twine and things like that that can do some damage. Absolutely, tedders and rakes can pick up twine and even really long pieces of grass if the wind's blowing wrong. And some of that sits on the machine and doesn't look like it's doing any harm, but it can actually start getting warm and tight and cook some of the grease out of the bearings on a wheel rake, for example. So it's always good to get those cleaned up whenever you come home or before you head to the field again.
Okay. So now probably for the most frustrating part of the conversation is when the baler doesn't work. So we try to be very careful about going through our baler every year and making sure that the pickup is in good condition, because that's probably the part of the baler that takes the most beating, because it's going to be digging into the ground from time to time. It's picking up a lot of yield and material and pushing it through the baler at a fairly high rate of speed. And there's bearings and cam followers and different things in here to keep all these tines in time and working. So, pull some shields off and feel bearings and make sure they're not rough, and fix it if you need to fix it. And like Dustin referred to earlier, missing or bent pickup teeth can also be a loss of yield. Why go to all the work of mowing and tedding and raking, and then the baler misses a third of it? So pickup's a really good spot to start. And also, if you can see the augers in here, make sure that the flighting is solid and not sharp on the edges and starting to roll over. So because those augers help feed the crop into the baler uniformly, and uniform crop feeding leads to good bales. So that's important to look at as well. Of course, look at the drive line and gearboxes, and there again, change oil and gearboxes to recommended intervals. If your baler has some type of rotocut or bale knives, this is a good time of year to sharpen them or replace them, because they take a lot of wear, especially if there's been a rock or two ran through. And worn knives are just more horsepower and more fuel being burned. So something else that Dustin and I talked about is loosen up the drive chains and check the idler pulleys on the drive chains, or the idler sprockets, because a lot of times those little idlers don't have real big bearings in them, and they'll be failing and you don't know it until they fall off and the chain falls off. So that's an important thing that gets overlooked quite a bit. Because of all the monitors and sensors, the electrical connections are very important and critical to being able to go. Usually a baler won't work properly without a monitor, depending how new it is. And so a little dielectric grease and special attention to those connections are important. And just like on the tractors, the hydraulic hoses take a beating going across the field, making sure they're secured tightly and no rubs or potential holes in them. So what else do you have to add to this, Dustin?
That checked all my list.
Okay. So, big square baler, small square baler, both have what's called bale dogs. And these I've worked on a lot of square balers over my career, mine and others. And one of the biggest things that people miss are the bale dogs. And these bale dogs come into the chamber as the hay's compressed, and it keeps the hay held back so it doesn't push against the twine while the knotters are doing their job. So these are spring-loaded stops that go in the chamber and hold the bale back. And if these springs are weak or broken, or there's a bunch of chaff built up around them that keep these bale dogs from from going in the bale chamber, it puts all the tension on the twine and it'll pull the knots apart or not even allow the knotters to tie. So if we have knotter problems on any baler, this is the very first thing we check are those bale dogs to make sure that they're moving free and that one of the springs hadn't broke. And the more that quit working at the same time, the worse the tying problems become. The situation I was in is we had 50 some bales on the ground and we were having knot problems, and with the baler shut off, you could hear strings popping knots on the bales that were already on the ground. And so that's the day I really learned the good things of maintaining these bale dogs and making sure the springs are functional and there's no material under it. So anything else on that, Dustin?
That's good.
Okay. And normally there's either 4 or 6 bale dogs on a baler. Like our 3x3 big square baler has 2 on either side of the chamber, and then 2 up on top underneath the knotters. So so knotters on a square baler can pretty much make a preacher cuss if they're giving you problems, especially if there's rain coming. But some of the things to help keep them working properly or keep them cleaned off and lubricated. I don't know how many balers I've looked at, and you open the knotter shield up and the balers are just a ball of grease and chaff and oil, and it's amazing that the twine even feeds in there. So we don't normally pressure wash them except maybe once a year, but we'll take a blowgun quite often and clean all the accumulated oil that's used for lubrication on these, clean it off so it doesn't collect chaff. We try to clean all the old twine and everything else out of them. Some of the biggest problems we've had with knotters are bill hooks that have actually been worn down. They have a groove cut into them. And so the bill hooks are what grab the twine to help tie the knot. And so if there's a groove there, it can't grab the twine. And so then the knot doesn't set right, and usually the knot pulls through. So that's really important. The needles that come up from the bottom of the bale chamber are really critical to make sure they're aligned right and not bent. And on the case of a lot of big square balers, they actually have rollers on them. If those rollers are locked up, especially hay preservatives hard on them, they don't want to feed the twine properly, and you're not going to get good knots. So, you know, these are a few things simple things that you can do without the dealer to get these to work. The one last thing that we've looked at and found quite often is that the twine will become wrapped around something as it's being fed from the twine boxes, especially on small square balers. If they use those old porcelain insulators, the insulators will actually get grooves cut in them, and it'll either, some of those grooves can cut the twine or make it misfeed or not feed properly. So like there'd be too much tension on it. And that's something worth looking at on a higher bale count baler. Anything else, Dustin?
Yeah, I would just emphasize that the importance of keeping your knotters lubricated and clean and dry. It's usually about our square baler is about the highest priority thing to find a shed roof when there's rain coming. And the reason to give your knotters so much love is that a lot of these problems that Jeremy said can make the preacher cuss seem like that they happen pretty slow. You'll pop a knot, something won't work once, and then it'll make 30 bales just fine, and then you'll have the problem happen again. And these things that are slow problems that get worse can be really frustrating until you figure them out. And so anything you can do ahead of time to make sure that the problem doesn't develop is a really good thing to do. So
something else that we do is our AGCO dealer will supply us with a spring kit for our tying system. So this spring here on the left, and then there's a couple other springs in here. We have a kit that has those in them. And then we also have a knotter kit. So it'll have all the essential parts to rebuild a knotter and the new pins to hold them in, you know, hold the parts in. It'll include bill hooks and some of these drive gears and different things like that. And it's a couple $100 to get that kit, but it doesn't take very long to save $200 worth of hay if you have those parts riding around in the baler with you. So something to think about. Talk to your parts guy and see if you can get a knotter kit if you're at all comfortable working on them. Go ahead, Dustin. This is your problem here.
Yes. Yeah. And I make a lot of round bales, and round balers are machines that, just like a lot of other hay implements, um, they run in heat and dirt with dry material, and everything on them spins and shakes and moves back and forth. And so a lot of maintenance ahead of time can really help. Round balers, it's important whether you have endless belts that don't have seams or you have laced belts that are actually tied together, to give them a good inspection. And these are things just like how a bad spot on a tire can hide the day you're looking at it. It's very good when lubricating these to have the machine running slowly, and of course not be touching anything when that's going on. But to really take a critical eye at those belts and say, well, that's a defect. How many hundred bales is that going to go? And and replace things before they get worse quickly. There's lots of bearings. You can check the bearings, as Jeremy mentioned, by trying to move the shaft and seeing how much play accumulates there. It's also really important. I shared a story with Jeremy about a grease bank that was feeding more than one bearing, and the tube going to one of the bearings was plugged. And because it continued to take grease to the other bearings, I didn't notice it until we started having problems. So it's very important to regularly grease those and make sure that they're getting grease. The roll bearings and all the chains that drive all those are on a 10-hour service on the in the manual, but really more often is a good thing, especially when it comes to chains. If you have an automatic greasing system or a chain oiling system that if you have one of these, every so often that you close the tailgate, it will send a squirt of grease and a drop of oil to the chains. Those are really important to not become complacent and believe that they're working, because things can stop working, and the machine keeps working well for quite a while before you feel the impact of what's happened. The drive line on these, really take care to make sure that the drive line doesn't get into your wiring and your hydraulic hoses. There's a lot going on at the back of the tractor, and if you're in small fields that have a lot of hills, and or driving down the road or hit a bump or anything that happens when you're baling hay, some things can kind of shift around, and it doesn't take long for a spinning drive line to rub problems or catch something important. And round balers have pickups on them that are very similar to square balers that Jeremy came through. And all of the things apply there for cam follower bearings. Make sure that things don't get hung up there. One of the more frustrating problems I remember with a pickup that took me a long time to figure out has involved getting the perfect size rock wedged behind one of the cross augers in the back. And it turns out there has to be space between the back wall of that auger and the auger flighting for it to work, and even if it's turning freely. So yeah, just lots of points on a round baler that need regular attention and a good set of eyes. This picture was a picture that my mom took trying to make a good picture for a photo contest of that magic moment when a bale comes out of the back of the baler. And I hate this picture because it shows you how much leaf loss I have in this moment. But what I also want you to see is how much chaff has built up in various places in that round baler that was released when we opened the tailgate and let it go. And that's a place we can see it, but I guarantee you underneath all those shields and around the pickup, chaff builds up all over the place. And every so often, you'll get enough chaff build up that things stop functioning for one reason or another. And a lot of net wrap cutting problems, net wrap feeding problems, problems with actuators not quite moving far enough to begin one of those processes. can all be traced back to a pile of chaff that got just a little bit too big. And it's so frustrating when you realize that was the problem, because it means that just a few moments cleaning it, or even taking a pause midway through a large day of baling hay to clean everything off, re-lubricating chains, for example, pays dividends, because then you don't have those bales that got messed up while waiting to figure it out. So,
one thing we forgot to add on here, Dustin, that is really, really important, seeing all this chaff and talking about bearings and failures, and have a fire extinguisher on everything. You can't underestimate the value of having a fire extinguisher. Put one on the baler, one on the tractor, and you need them. And hopefully you never use them, but the day you need them, you better have them. So, anything else on this slide, Dustin?
that gets it for me.
Okay. So when Dustin and I were talking about this presentation after Dr. Johnson had asked us to give it, our conversation shifted a little bit, and Dustin was like, well, my business model is this. And I'm like, well, I like guys like you, because I buy your equipment when you're done with it. So that kind of gave us the idea to spend the last few minutes, instead of talking hay equipment maintenance, with the shortage of equipment and high prices and different things like that, we thought we'd discuss our business model. So what we try to do is, when it's time for us to upgrade, we buy good used older equipment, and preferably go to the western states, because the market's a little more saturated, the prices are a little less, and at least it used to be that trucking, if you were careful, could still bring you a cheaper machine than buying it in Indiana or the Midwest. So for example, this load, the baler came out of South Dakota and the mower came from Wisconsin, and it worked out that the driver could pick both of them up at the same time. And so I only had one trucking bill on two pieces of equipment. What we like is to have larger capacity equipment. So self-propelled swather, big square baler, because we only have a month and a half to get all of our hay made for the year. So when it's time to go, we need to go. And our winters are long, so it's a good time to rebuild and refurbish the equipment and do any updates that we need to do. So we try to buy something that has already taken the depreciation hit, but still has good value and will have good residual value when we're done with it. We operate under the theory of having a couple backup tractors rather than just the bare minimum of tractors, because if something breaks in hay season, you normally don't have time to fix it. Just drag another horse out and hook it up and go. You can fix the broken tractor later. So on the reciprocal of that, though, if we have something that has sat around for more than 2 years, a piece of equipment, and we don't need it, we get rid of it and try to upgrade our equipment, or put that value towards upgrading our equipment. So the final part of our business model is we have cattle, because stuff goes wrong, weather goes bad. Not everything is premium cash crop Timothy. And so the cattle are a value added resource that we can run some of our lower quality forages through and still keep the fertility on the farm and keep the value on the farm. So I'll let Dustin go ahead and talk about his model.
Yeah, and my model's a bit different. So it's always fun when you like somebody and you disagree with them, and you can have good discussion and still like them at the end. So we'll give you two different perspectives here a little bit. But yeah, I like having a whole bunch of older tractors around as backup that are low cost. And I prioritize my equipment dollars where reliability is the most crucial. And kind of over time, that has led me to have a fleet of hay equipment that's pretty new and definitely new compared to some of the other things we run on the farm. We're most of the farm press magazines and things will tell you to spend every dollar you can on the farm on your corn planter because it's the most important. But those farms don't have hay, is what I'm thinking, because usually when we're in planting season, as critical as that is, if we have a breakdown in the middle of the day and we spend the rest of the day working on the planter, we'll come back tomorrow and finish the field, and that's not always an opportunity in hay. Sometimes if you're baling and you've got an extra 15 minutes before the storm hits and you don't have an extra day, where a lot of times we're baling need 4 days to cure hay, and we've got 3.9 with the Indiana climate. And so it's very easy to start running a mental calculation of lost hours and what that means. We don't have the backup that Jeremy has in a large cattle herd. And so we really feel the losses we have on quality if something goes wrong, to where we're selling both, and it's a lot more fun, and it's a lot easier and a lot better price to sell really nice hay instead of hay that almost turned out nice when it got rained on. So over time, the way that we've done that is that I am buying new hay equipment and trading it on a schedule. And I'm a natural born worrier, and I'm not as mechanically savvy as Jeremy. And so this has given me a lot of peace of mind because it helps me know that it's going to work and know that I've got a known ownership cost. So really the unknown in owning machinery a lot of times is what a large repair is going to cost. And so at least while I'm still making payments on a new machine, I try to go ahead and buy a new machine so that I've also got a warranty, so that I know that I don't have to make a payment and a big repair bill on that machine in the same year. And then what I've done from there on is, each enterprise on the farm, and the hay business being one of them, has a set of machinery. And I don't like trading equipment. I'm not the world's greatest negotiator. I usually feel like I didn't get quite as good a deal as I should have got at the end of it. And so one of my solutions there too is to buy it new and hold it. And so if I'm buying I buy a brand new mower, and when that's completely paid for, hopefully it's still good. I've been maintaining it. I've been taking care of it. I'm going to hold it for another 5 or 6 years and buy a brand new baler. And so I'm trying not to be buying more than one piece of machinery at a time. And I'll keep that piece from 0 years old until 12 or 13 years old. And this took some time to get started. I couldn't do this the first year that I was in business. But and if this isn't you, the thing that you can take away from this is try really hard not to have every piece of machinery in one sector of your business be the same age. So you've always got something you're replacing and then something you're going to be replacing. And you don't end up with 3 tractors that are all roughly the same age and hours, and it's working great right now, but in 5 to 10 years you're going to need to replace all 3 of them at the same time. So yes, but a throwback to the late great Bob Taylor from Purdue University. Something that's on my mind when we do this are the dirties. He told us in farm management class to never forget the dirties, and that's depreciation, interest, repairs, taxes, insurance, and something else. Storage. Sorry, Bob. But so you can, I try to remember this and think about my machinery dealings, and sometimes decisions to make a higher payment and eat more depreciation results in less taxes, or repairs, more taxes. So you can think about that and try to calculate an ownership cost. And then sometimes things are not apparent. Ownership cost, if you're going to be on the high side of the depreciation curve or the lower side of the depreciation curve, might not be all that different when you add in those repairs and the time spent. And you can consider whether it's better to buy a $40,000 mower and sell it when it's a $25,000 mower versus buying a $25,000 mower and selling it when it's an $18,000 mower. It just may not be as different when you look at the actual cash spent, as long as you've got the cash flow to make it all happen. One other plug in there for trading out your machinery frequently is that designs improve with time. If you decide to take the more expensive route that I'm on, you get to take advantage when they figure out a better way to feed net wrap through the round baler, or better way to bearing design for mowers. We always give the equipment companies a hard time because costs go up, but often you really do get something more for it because those things turn out to be better machines. So we do that. Final thought for you there is that old isn't as scary if it's mine. And what I mean by that is that some of those machines that we've owned for a long time and have been taken care of for a long time and doing the scheduled maintenance, those ones just aren't as scary as a used piece of machinery of the same vintage that we would buy on a used lot. And so we've been very happy to keep some things for a long time and let us focus our machinery money on new equipment, on those things that we have to have right now. I really do like this picture in the thing, because that's I'm on a Farmall 856 tractor that is 52 years old when this picture was taken, and it's pulling a 1-year-old hay tedder. And that's just exactly how we do it.
And Dustin, I would agree with that. A lot of our tractors are older, especially for a smaller farm. Pre-emissions is important if you're going to service it yourself. And we try to keep our investment down on tractors and invest in hay equipment instead. So anything else you want to add to this, Dustin?
I think that's everything. Yeah.
This is your slide, Dustin.
Yeah, so I tossed this one in. Sorry, I was on the road this week and I didn't get a chance to talk to Jeremy as much about what I was doing to his slideshow. But this is another thing that I really like. And it comes from the idea that no matter what you do, if you're the best maintainer in the world who has bought a brand new line of farm equipment, things still break no matter what. Things go wrong. And so one of the best ways you can guard yourself against that is to cooperate with your neighbors. Find people who can come in and save the day when something goes wrong for you, and then make it a priority in your own business to go out and help your neighbors when they need help too. So this is a fine picture of that. This is my dad round baling some hay, and another one of my mom's pictures that she took for the photogenic value. And I said, oh, that's the weirdest picture in the whole world. Because you may have noticed what's wrong with this picture. There is a round baler baling the final windrow, and all the bales on the ground are square bales. So we almost got done, and we bale with cooperatively square bales with a neighbor. So, and we have for a decade and a half now, so that we pool our resources at small square bale time, and we've got more trailers and more trucks and more wagons and more people. And then every now and again, it really works out when we bust the small square baler to go get another piece of machinery and get the hay baled. And that's exactly what we did here. That's what's right with this picture, is that we were able to jump in and help our neighbors finish that field.
I would also second that comment. I have two neighbors, or two people in the neighborhood, that have big square balers as well as mine. And we all have the same size baler, and we actually all have the same make of baler, just slightly different models. That way we can share parts and help keep each other going by fixing them. And we have a standing agreement that if somebody breaks down, that if we're done before the due sets on, that we go bail for them, and we just charge fuel and twine, and then try to return the favor later. So that's a pretty good feeling when you're broke down and there's still 50 acres of hay to go, and somebody else pulls in and gets it done before it rains that night or whatever. So that's a fun way to work together. So I guess the point of this slide presentation was hopefully it helped make you think a little bit about looking at some extra stuff on your equipment that you don't normally look at, and you just realize you can't fix it all, but you sure can reduce breakdowns and some of the heartburn at the end of the day. So that's all we have for this presentation, but I think we have some time for some questions, and I'd like to hear what you have to say or ask.
So certainly, thank you so much, Jeremy and Dustin. We greatly appreciate your time and your expertise, and just sharing some of your tips and tricks for keeping us going during the hay season. So at this time, do we have any questions? So someone commented they had just had a DIRTIS discussion this week as well, this past week. So it's something that obviously has stuck with several people from that class. So, all right. And then for me personally, that's what prior to about the last couple of years for our hay season, I was typically the one that at the end of the day or end of the week or whatever would have to clean off all the equipment. So at that point, we were still using the air compressor. So that was 30, 45 minutes, an hour, depending on how dirty it was for the week. So for me personally, my husband actually invested in a battery powered leaf blower here a couple years ago. And that has made our life so much easier. Just being able to clean it off at the end of each day has really lessened my time that I've had to spend just cleaning off the equipment each week.
I could have cleaned it off.
Yeah, I think in the presentation we might have said to do that in the morning, but you're exactly right, Alyssa. You want to do that in the evening when you're already dirty. You don't want to start the day with that job.
Yep. So, all right, I'm going to go ahead and launch our poll for today. So if you wouldn't mind answering a few questions, we would appreciate it. So, and at this time, again, we'd be happy to take any comments, any questions. Looks like Dr. Johnson has something he might want to say.
Oh, no.
Well, I really appreciate you gentlemen doing this. I thought it was very well done. I want you to reflect maybe on, do you do any of your insecticide applications? And if you do you have any comments about sprayers and their well-being?
Go ahead, Dustin. That's not my ball game there.
I do have a sprayer, and actually I try everything I can to avoid spraying our alfalfa. I'm a big fan of leafhopper resistant alfalfa for that reason, and insecticides have always scared me a little bit. But so I guess the first thing on sprayers would be, as far as maintenance and whatnot, is to make sure that you have your safety equipment close at hand, and absolutely have a rinse tank riding on that sprayer so that you can rinse off your hands, flush out your eyes, anything that when something goes wrong. And it's the same kind of thing when spraying. And I always carry a neoprene rubber gloves. A lot of our extension folks have done a great job of figuring out how self-contamination and exposure to pesticides happen. And the number one way to reduce it in those studies has been just to wear gloves. And then I usually use the cheap disposable neoprene gloves, and you can take them right off and dispose of them and not contaminate the inside of your tractor cab with them. But yeah, so a note there on taking care of yourself, on taking care of your sprayer, but also I just carry spare parts. If I get a nozzle that plugs while we're spraying, it doesn't look like it's spraying evenly, I remove the entire nozzle body so that I don't have to get it all over my hands, and replace it with a new one that's ready to go with a new nozzle, a screen, and a rubber washer. So there's just a one-piece replacement. I don't have to take apart in the field. So looking at that, hoses, absolutely run things under pressure and calibrate them. It's amazing how different a spray pattern that looks maybe just slightly different than one that's spraying correctly. If you do a calibration and hold your beaker under that nozzle, and hopefully at that point you're collecting clean water, maybe off 15 or 20%. And in that one spot where the nozzle's spraying, it's taking you way off label for whatever you're trying to spray. So yeah, carry spare parts. Make sure you clean it out really, really good. And remember that poly tanks have the ability to hold chemical in them because they're porous. So rinse water and allowing clean water to sit in the sprayer instead of chemicals to sit in the sprayer is a great idea. remember your PPE and carry spare parts.
Good. Alicia, I'll let others have comment, but I'd like to have another question to them. I don't want others to ask theirs first.
We don't have any others in the chat box at this moment. So
Okay.
go ahead, Keith.
Okay, very good. Well, I just would like to say you guys have a fair amount of acreage. How do you go about deciding if you're going to do the harvest or worry about the weather? How do you do your weather forecasting and feel reasonably okay with, going ahead and starting the process?
I guess I would say we live 6 miles from Lake Superior. And so weather forecasting takes a whole new spin because of the lake effect, rain showers, high humidity, cloud cover. We're kind of under the philosophy, unless there's a large front moving in that they're forecasting an inch or more of rain, that we mow hay every day. And we're going to lose some. And I farm some of my hay on shares with a couple guys that have a lot of wisdom. And my buddy Bruce will go, well, we'll just go mow another 40 tomorrow if it gets rained on today. So we have enough acres that we know we're going to feed some cattle, and we're also going to make some good hay. And just about the time we don't mow, then the weather's nice and we're kicking ourselves for not having hay down. But if we get 100 or 150 acres of hay on the ground that's getting wet, we stop mowing until we get that mess cleaned up. So it's a balancing act, and we're never quite right.
So Dustin, you don't have all the livestock opportunity there. Are you a little more conservative approach in weather forecasting?
Yeah, we're gonna agree to disagree on this one too. I've got a whole host of superstitions and things that I try to go with, but the best one is to really try to take a big picture of what's going on with the weather system instead of what the weather forecast is telling you. And so absolutely mow with high pressure. So if you're maybe the weather forecast calls for a 30% chance of rain. That's the favorite weather forecast in the state of Indiana. I'm convinced if it's a 30% chance of rain, the barometer is gone up, and we have a cold, dry breeze coming from the north or the northwest, I mow. If there's a 30% chance of rain and it is kind of sticky and we have a south or a southeast breeze, I do not mow. So that's my number one superstition there. And then, and like I said, tried to really dive into the forecast. I'm a fan of the National Weather Service's website, NOAA.gov. You can go in there and they have a graphical forecast that will actually show you things like dew point and cloud cover, and really add some clarity sometimes when they say there's a 30% chance of rain. Is it a 30% chance of a pop-up thunderstorm? If there is, go mow. If there is a 30% chance of clouds and drizzle, that means 100% chance, and I avoid it.
Very good. Yeah, appreciate both insights.
I'm kind of with Dustin on this. One other thing, I guess, thinking through this that we'll do is if there is a chance of rain, we'll try to mow a field that's pure grass that doesn't have any trefoil or clover in it, and knowing that that's going to get baled a little bit sooner than something with heavy legume content. So then we'll mow the high legume content when the wind's out of the northwest and the sun's shining and the skies are blue, and usually that high pressure will hold in here long enough to help us get that hay dry.
And if an older gentleman told me once that if you have to take a chance, you're better off mowing in the rain than baling in the rain, and that is absolutely true. So if there's a risky portion of a weather window, make sure you're taking chances on the day you mow to make sure the day you bale is a good one.
All right. Well, we don't have any other questions. So again, thank you both, Justin and Jeremy, so much for your information today. We greatly appreciate it all. So thank you all for completing the poll. And again, next week will be our last week for this session of the Forage Forum Fridays. We'll be talking about kind of labeling and some of those truths and myths and why we do it. So Thank you all so much and have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
Thanks for your time, everybody.